thank you all for spending your Tuesday evening to learn more about what's going on in the great state of Texas. Anything that impacts children and taxpayers of our state should be given careful and prayerful consideration. We have a special audience tonight, including representatives from public schools, from private schools, home schools like Makisha, education policy enthusiasts, and of course taxpayers. We also have a few young adults who often get left out of the education conversation. They're out of school now, they don't have kids yet, and property taxes are probably not top of mind for them yet. But one way or another, they're going to have to live with and pay for the decisions that we make today. My name is Spencer Sino. I'm a businessman and father of 4 children who've attended public and private schools in the state of Texas. After about 11 years in the Dallas area, I think I'm allowed to call myself a Texan now. At the very least, you could say that I'm a California refugee who came here lawfully and on my own dime. School choice is often framed nationally as a battle between big, powerful teachers' unions who don't want public schools to be defunded and right-wing Republican conservative think tanks who want to inject some competition into education, or something like that. But I think tonight you're going to hear a much more informed and nuanced conversation on the topic. First of all, teachers' unions don't have the clout in Texas as they do in, say, California or Illinois. So it's a little different than the national conversation, and it's certainly different here. This is more of a intra-Republican Party policy and philosophical disagreement. Now, I'll leave the particulars to the conversation that's ahead of us, but I'd like to note that as citizens, we're not supposed to just fall in line with the dictates of party officials, party leaders. As the Texas Scorecard, and Michael Sullivan in particular, likes to remind us, in our republic, the citizens are in charge. And therefore, it's our responsibility to discuss important issues so that we can instruct our elected officials as to what policy we wish them to implement. So rather than the typical cage match of personalities where the most memorable one-liner wins the night, we're going to engage in a substantive conversation between informed citizens. So without further ado, tonight we're going to have a discussion with 2 education activists, I would say, Meg Bakich and Corey DeAngelis, who disagree on this issue. I'll do my best to try to facilitate the conversation, along with the help of a woman who needs no introduction in Texas conservative circles, Sarah Gonzalez. Sarah?
Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you guys being out here. For those who don't know me, I host a show on Blaze TV Monday through Friday, where we talk about, politics and culture, news of the day, along with the Texas Scorecard podcast that I have called Come and Take It, as well as serving as the vice president of Texas Family Project here in the great state of Texas. But more importantly, I am the mother of 2 young boys, one of whom, the older one, who has gone to public, private, charter, and also homeschool, which we are currently homeschooling. So trust me when I tell you I've run the gamut of all education options here in the state of Texas. One thing that I want you guys to remember, which Spencer touched on so well, is all of us are here because in one way or another, we are invested in the next generation's education. And I think that we can all agree, even if we have a disagreement on the nuance or the way in which we reform there is reform that is needed. Education reform is needed here in the state of Texas because as we're seeing from, the testing and the vetting process, there are great teachers in this state. There are also not great teachers in this state. But when we see the testing and, the kids that are coming out not knowing things that they should know, and on top of that, we see the amount that we're paying in our property taxes, which just makes me sick to my stomach. When every year when I get the bill, I'm like, okay, that's gone up, which is a whole nother issue. But the point is that we all just need to remember that we're all here because we are all invested in the next generation's education. And I just want us to remember that as we navigate this conversation. And Spencer's right. I mean, we are the ones who are supposed to tell our representatives, we are the constituents, we're supposed to tell them how we want things to be. And so I know there's a lot of noise about current legislation proposed, about maybe the best path forward, and I hope that this helps inform you guys and maybe give you a perspective that you hadn't thought of. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, Meg, why don't you start by telling us a little about yourself and how you got involved in education, and then Corey can do the same.
Okay, great. Just make sure this is working. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Meg Bakich. I was born and raised in California. I graduated from the University of Notre Dame, where I met my husband. I then worked for Morgan Stanley, trading the S&P 500 at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And upon having children, I made the decision to stay at home and be a full-time mom. And I am the proud mom of 5 amazing children, 1 awesome daughter-in-law, and soon to be a grandmother. So life is good. So I have lived here in the Park Cities now for 25 years, so I think I am a Texan. And
We'll allow both of you.
Okay, thank you. And so with 5 children, I had the advantage, and I'm going to talk to you because it's our conversation, but with 5 children, I had a front row seat at the transformation that happened in education throughout the country. So I don't know if you remember, because you look very young compared to me. You might have been in high school at the time, I don't know, and that's a compliment. But in 2010 was Common Core, and people forget about Common Core. But in Texas, we call it College and Career Ready. And what College and Career Ready is it's a shift away from academics to an education of equity based on government values, attitudes, beliefs, and worldviews. And it also makes our schools workforce development training rather than instilling academic foundational knowledge. So that began 2010 was Common Core. In 2013 is when it really hit my school district. And at that time, I had high schoolers all the way down to elementary school. So my oldest was a junior in high school, and he came home and said, "Mom, you've got to get involved. They're teaching communism and socialism in my English class." And I thought, what? That's crazy. This was back in 2013. So I've been in this battle a really long time. And at that same time, I had elementary school students. And my elementary school was used as a pilot for one-to-one devices. So my children were experimented on with one-to-one devices. And at that time, I was a young mom. I didn't know better. I thought it was a little strange, but they kept telling me, "Oh, your child needs this. This is good for them. So when they get into the workforce, they'll know how to work on the computer." And it just didn't sit well with me. So it's a really long story. Some of you are very aware of my story, so I don't want to make it too long, but I battled. I went first to my school district. I went to my teachers. I went to the principal. I went to the administration. I went all the way up the line. I finally ended up in a school board meeting. I'd never been to a school board meeting in my life because I thought, for sure, nobody wants pornography in our schools. They don't want Marxism. They don't want our children on a device 4 to 5 hours a day. They don't want to remove, math facts, spelling tests, cursive, all of the ways, that you and I were taught to learn. Books, paper, pencil, those were on a shelf gathering dust. So as I went to my local school board, I was beating my head against a wall and I couldn't figure out why. And so I began to do research because I wanted to understand, why are we teaching our children these things? how is this coming to my school? Who is profiting off of this? And that brought me to Austin. So I went to Austin, and the first time I went to Austin was in 2016. And I spent hours listening to the legislature. And as I listened, and I began to really learn that the problem was the state government and our federal government. Yep. I'm not sure if you're aware, but in 2015, under Obama, our federal government passed the Every Student Succeeds Act. And in that law, it states that if you take the federal money, you have to teach the fifth column of the government, essentially character traits. And then in the state of Texas, we passed a law that mandates the teaching of government character traits, and what's mandated to be taught is then scored. So as I sat there listening, and I could go on and on because it's been over a decade, I recognized that slowly, they do it very slowly, they play the long game. Laws had been passed that removed control from the local government and placed it at the state and placed it in Washington, D.C. And when they did that, they removed my voice. And so then I came back to my community and I tried to share what I learned. And in 2017, I actually ran for school board. I didn't realize what I was stepping into, but it was a den of vipers. And it was running against a machine, and people weren't nice because they didn't want to hear what was happening in the school. And there were people who wanted what I was fighting against. Mm-hmm. So then I recognized, the real fight's at the state level. It's not local. So that's kind of the long story of how I find myself sitting here today. But the issue of government-regulated school choice, and I don't want to talk about that yet because we'll get into that. We're just supposed to tell our bios. But that was a topic that has been discussed almost every year I've been in Austin. And it's really sucked the oxygen out of the room because nobody ever talks about why our public schools are failing, how do we fix our public schools, and who's profiting off of the failure of our public schools. And you won't know that or have those answers unless you're there, because the government's run by the people that show up. And so there's a lot of people who are paid to be vendors and lobbyists, and they always go first. I've seen you. You haven't seen me, but I've seen you a lot in Austin. But the people on the ground like myself, the parents who are fighting for their children, they don't get the voice. And so with that, I'd love to hear your background as someone so young, how you were tapped to be the face of school choice. And in my circles, you're known as Corey DeAngelis, the face of the school choice evangelist.
It's on X.
And I think at the time, yeah. And I think at the time you were not even married, maybe no children. I'm thrilled to hear you're married with children now. But when you were tapped for this role, you didn't have any skin in the game. So I'm curious how you got to be where you are. So it's nice to meet you,
Yep.
and thank you.
Corey, please tell us about yourself. Thank you.
Yep. So I'm glad we could start out by agreeing on something about there being a lot of problems in the public school system. You talked about, a decade ago, having Marxism in the public schools. I think it's actually gotten worse since then. And you also mentioned that you were banging your head against the wall at the school board meetings, and things just weren't changing, right? And we still have this failing system, whether it's based on academics, whether it's based on the values that aren't aligned with your own. And I think it's because the school board system doesn't have an incentive to improve outcomes, to listen to parents. We saw what happened when the schools were closed. We had remotely learning, we should have called it, because there wasn't a lot of learning going on. And families got to see what was happening in the classroom. Nationwide, you had parents showing up at school board meetings. And guess what happened? The National School Boards Association sent a letter to Biden implying that parents should be investigated for quote-unquote domestic terrorism. They've invoked the Patriot Act to do so. The FBI actually created a threat tag specifically for parents protesting at school board meetings. This is why I see school choice a little differently from you. Is I think that you need an escape.
You don't know how I see school choice because I haven't told you yet.
Well, I know a little bit,
but and you're going right into the argument. That's okay.
But I didn't interrupt your opening remarks either, and you got into it a little bit. But I think
so. We'll let Corey finish up his thought, and then we'll hear your bio, and then we'll get into it.
you need to have an escape valve. If they're not listening to you at the school board meeting, you need to be able to vote with your feet to a school that's aligned with your values. That gives a competitive response, an incentive to the public school to listen to you, to do a better job, to focus on the basics, math, reading, and writing, as opposed to radical left ideology and Marxism, which we agree is in the public school system. And that's how I started to get into this. In my bachelor's and master's, I studied economics. And so I've seen how when you don't have competition, whether it's in any other industry, just imagine if you were assigned to a grocery store just based on where you lived, and you couldn't go anywhere else, except unless you moved houses, or if you paid out of pocket twice, once for the government grocery store you weren't using, and another one that you actually wanted. The government grocery store would have spoiled food, it would give you food poisoning, and if it had, and it might not even have food on the shelves if you didn't have an incentive to actually cater to the needs of customers. I see the same problem with the government-run school system. They throw more money at the problem every single year. Right now in Texas, we spend about $16,000 per student per year. It's about 50% higher than average private school tuition. And guess what happens? They just say, well, we're failing, we just need more money. It's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I more so got into this during my PhD as a researcher. So I have a doctorate, but don't call me doctor. I'm not a real doctor, more like a Jill Biden doctor. I have a PhD in education policy, but my first study at the University of Arkansas looked at the effects of the Milwaukee voucher program. This started in 1990. We had long-term data over time on these students compared to the kids in the public schools, all else equal, making apples-to-apples comparisons. We found a significant reduction in crime later on in life. So test scores are part of academic success and the quality of a school, but it's not everything. They can also shape your character. It can shape your values. And what we've seen over the past few years, I think that's why we have so much school choice now, is families saw that the schools were not aligned with their values. They were telling kids to hate their country, and this is a widespread phenomenon. We have a nationally representative survey that just came out on this from Education Next. They asked U.S. high school students, nationally representative survey, finding that one of the findings that I thought was really interesting was that 36% of the respondents said that their teachers in the public school system often or almost daily said that they thought that America was a fundamentally racist country. We don't need that crap in the public school system. I think we can agree there. And I think we shouldn't trap anybody based on their zip code into a school that's not aligned with their values. You should be able to go somewhere else.
But we do still want to hear about you, Corey.
Yeah, so I started as a researcher, did a PhD in education policy. I did a lot of studies on the effects of school choice, crime reduction, 2 peer-reviewed studies on that. I thought I was going to go into academia at first, until I saw the peer review process. It was a disaster. I still got through it. I published some studies, but 99% of the people in higher education academia are on the left. And they're not just on the left, they're on the far left. They're totally Marxist. I had one peer review process of this first study of the reduction in crime as a result of school choice. One peer reviewer, it's double blind, by the way, they kind of know who you are because you usually publish the study first online, then they can kind of see who's actually has their name on the study. But as a author, when you submit your study, you don't know who's reviewing your study. So I get this review back and they say, you know, I think it's causal. The methods are legit. This was in a journal called Urban Education. They said, well, you said the words urban students. You can't say that. There's no such thing as urban students. They are students in urban areas. And I was just like, okay, cool, I'll switch it around. But the reason that I wrote that was that in their About the Journal, they said that they had all this description about urban students. So I was just copying their own language. They were able to say that, but I wasn't able to say that. But the next part of the review is they said, even though I buy the methods, why didn't you talk about whiteness and how this relates to oppression? And they wanted me to talk about critical race theory concepts in this study that was just, I wanted to do the methods, the results, here's what we found. They didn't like that I didn't talk about all this lefty gobbledygook. And so I kind of figured out pretty quickly my home was not going to be in a university. So I went to the think tank world. My first job was at the Cato Institute in D.C. By the way, I did grow up in San Antonio, Texas. I've lived here most of my life. I actually went to public schools all through K through 12 education. But now I'm living here in San Antonio again.
I think we can all agree as well. The K through 12 public schools in Texas, even a couple decades ago, are not what they are now, and they've very much changed. So,
very good. So, thank you for that. And you did get a chance to touch on a lot of the points around school choice. Maybe we'll shift to Meg. Meg, tell us why you oppose school choice and I guess the perils that you see for the state of Texas and children, parents, taxpayers, or what have you.
Well, I think it goes back to my opening comment, which is before you can find a solution, you have to identify the problem. And I hope that I made it clear what the problem is. And it was a deliberate shift. So that's why schools aren't the way they were 2 decades ago, is that Common Core, and in Texas it's called College and Career Ready, came into our state. And our schools are having to follow the shift away from academics to an education of an education of equity based on government values. So this shift is coming from the government based on laws, rules, and regulations. The TEKS is corrupted with the Common Core. So that is the reason. That's the problem we're trying to address. And I would say my husband, single mom, went through DISD, graduated in 1991, and he learned to read, and he learned to write, and he loves America. So it wasn't that long ago. Our schools can be fixed if people want to fix them. That's the crux of the problem. There has to be a desire. And that's what I've seen. And if you spend time in Austin, you'll see that. There's the lobbyists like Corey, and then there's the parents and the taxpayers who are pleading with our representatives to fix our public schools. And we have solutions there. And I like to say, because as a conservative, it's frustrating for me to listen to people like Abbott or even to hear Corey, because they try to use the buzzwords woke, Marxism, the pornography in the schools, in order to get conservatives to think, oh, that's really the problem.
That is all happening.
It 100% is happening, but I'll tell you from experience, what's happened is when someone like me fought it in 2013, I fought it in books. What they did was they removed the books. We have HB 900, which tells parents that they can go in and look at any book and decide if they want to use that book or not. But what happened was the advent of technology, education technology, the one-to-one devices. So everything that we're fighting is coming in through the technology. I don't know if you've ever heard of CASEL, the collaborative academic social and emotional learning. It is the foundation platform for almost every educational app. And Karen Niemi is their CEO, and she point blank states that the social and emotional learning is used to create social justice essential warriors. And this is in every single educational application. It's on the technology, and it doesn't matter whether you go to public or private or charter. If your child's on the device, you aren't aware of how they're being groomed on that device. And interestingly, I don't want to get off on that, but I'll discuss that further. As a conservative, obviously, I fought that. And then I recognized it was coming in through the technology. So how do we get this out? How do we fix the problem? Well, I'll tell you what, as a conservative, I believe in small government. I'm for small government. I'm for local control. And I believe that a parent's right to choose where their child goes to school does not come from the government. It's my right that comes from God. I can choose to put my child anywhere I want. I don't ask the government for permission, and they don't give me that right. That's very important. So when we talk about school choice, we also, so we have to define the problem, which I've attempted to do. Then we have to define, what does school choice mean? What does it actually mean? Because those of us who follow government policy are aware that more often than not, a law is named the opposite of what it does. We have the Patriot Act, it's unpatriotic. Mm-hmm. The Inflation Reduction Act, increased inflation. And then we have school choice. And everywhere it's been implemented over time, genuine school choice goes away. So I think you have to do research.
That's not
It's
true,
kind of,
though.
excuse me. I'm
Well, you've been
gonna-
talking
I'm
quite a
gonna
while, and it's a two-person
Can I
kind of
finish?
conversation.
Yes, finish your thought,
Okay,
and then we'll let
thank you.
Corey.
Real quick, I'll make it super fast. Like I did to find out what was happening in our schools, people have to do their research on where government-regulated school choice has been implemented. Look at Sweden. That was in the 90s.
Why not look at the United
After
States? We
20
live here. Why would you
I've
look at
loved-
Sweden?
Okay,
Why is that your
I'll get
number one
to the
example?
U.S. We have Sweden, and after 20 years, they outlawed homeschooling. They have a state curriculum. Okay, so then we have Canada. Let's look at our 51st
Yeah, why are we
state.
looking everywhere else except for the
I'm gonna
50
get-
states in the United States
I'm
that
gonna
have school choice?
I'm gonna get to the United States. In Canada, the Catholic schools there are publicly funded, and because they are publicly funded, they had to teach the LGBTQ agenda. And so, what did the parents do over in the last 3 years? They have created a consortium of parents, and they have created independent Catholic schools. And what does independent means? It takes no government funding. So now let's go to the United States. My favorite case is Maine. It's my all-time favorite. Because in Maine, they passed a state tuition. And the state of Maine said this cannot be used in any religious school, in any sectarian school, state tuition. Well, Christian parents said, that's discriminating. That's wrong. They took it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2022, in Carson versus Macon, the Supreme Court ruled that it was a violation of their free exercise clause of the First Amendment and a violation of the freedom of religion, and that these parents could use that state tuition in that school, in any school they wanted, Christian, whatever you want. So the parents begin to use their vouchers there, or their state tuition. Maine amended their Maine Human Rights Act. And when they did that, it states that wherever that money, state tuition goes, they have to teach the LGBTQ agenda. So they've lost their freedom. So what people thought they were escaping, the minute the government money goes in, it becomes a government school. And we can see that right now with what's happening with Trump. Trump right now is telling Maine, you do what I say, or I'm taking my federal money away. Because when my money's there, I'm in control. Same thing with Biden, Title IX. Men are going to play in women's sports. And if you don't allow it, I'm taking my money away. Because it just goes to show the old adage, I'm sure you were all taught this. My dad used to always say it, whoever has the gold makes the rules. So when the government's money's in there, they make the rules. So that's the case in Maine. And we've got Arizona that I could go on and on.
What happened worse in Arizona? What?
You want to know what's happening in
Yeah, go
Arizona?
ahead.
The state tuition vouchers, I don't know, have you heard about the state tuition vouchers are funding a LGBTQ school? Because those students, they felt bullied. So what they did was they took their state money and they created their own school.
So those can exist with or without school choice. And there's a lot of states that don't have school choice.
But
that
I'm
have
not funding
worse
it.
government
But I'm not
regulations.
funding it. I don't want to fund it. And see, the problem with the government...
But you are funding it in the government-run school system to the tune of $17,000. You're going to propose a bill to defund the public schools?
Corey, with government
You're saying
regulated...
to go fix the public schools. We've been banging our head against the wall for decades. It hasn't worked. Dallas ISD
Well,
has
because-
18% of kids proficient
let
in
him talk.
reading. I know, she's been talking the whole time.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
But if you look at Sweden, when they passed their voucher program in 1992, they had 1% of kids in private schools. So it's not like it ruined private education over there. They didn't really have private education before they had vouchers. They have a whole different legal system in Canada and Sweden. I'm sure that's why you went there first, because there aren't much examples of overreach in America. If you look at states that have no school choice, they have more government regulation. Look at places like Massachusetts, Rhode Island. They have no private school choice programs, and guess what? They have the worst homeschooling laws on the books. Look on the flip side, places like Oklahoma, Iowa. They have universal school choice policies and the least regulated homeschooling environments as well. Look at the Texas Homeschool Coalition. They signed on to the bill. They're supportive of education savings accounts. They also put out a report finding in every single state, more than 30 now, that have private school choice programs, homeschool regulation has not gone up. The government can already regulate private and home education today. They do in blue states. They have historically. And look, if you have school choice, you're going to have a broader coalition to fight back against government regulations. As we know, politics is all about organized interest pushing for what they want. The teachers' unions do this all the time, all across the country, and they're effective because they lock arms and they lobby the legislature. Well, guess what? When you have school choice, when you give families the opportunity to take their taxpayer funding meant for their kid to another environment that's not the government-run school, well, now you have a broader coalition to fight back against any authoritarian calls for regulation in the future. And so I think we're on the same side that we're against government overreach and regulation. But I think your proposal to not allow people to have that voluntary choice to make that cost-benefit decision for their own families, you're going to have a higher likelihood of regulations in the future because you have 90% of kids going to government-controlled schools right now where they're learning that big government is the solution to all their problems. They're going to turn out to vote. And what are they doing in the government-run school system? They're churning out Democrat voters to like socialism as the answer to everything. They're going to vote to regulate home education and private education. They did this in Oregon in 1922. They outlawed private education altogether. Was that because of a school choice program? No, they didn't have one. It's because they had authoritarians who wanted to control the minds of other people's children. You don't have to take the funding. That's your choice. And I would be totally against any bill that said you must take this and you have no other opportunity. But at the end of the day, we can't make perfect the enemy of the good. The current status quo school system where we have $17,000 per student per year, it's totally controlled by the government. And we're just saying, if we're not going to change anything, that you're just forced to keep sending those tax dollars meant for your kid to that school. I don't think the money belongs to the government schools. Education funding is meant for educating children, not for protecting a particular institution. We should fund the student, not the system. And if we want to talk separately about what that level of funding should be, I don't know what you believe it should be. It's $17,000 now. I don't know if you think it should be more or less. But I think we're throwing a lot of money at the problem and it's not getting its way into the classroom, which I think you said earlier. And part of the problem is when you have no incentive to spend money wisely, it goes towards administrative bloat. We have half a dozen superintendents in this state that make more than the president, over $400,000 a year. And so again, I think we agree there's a huge problem with what's happening. We can't make families wait any longer. Why should they be forced to, let's just fix the public schools. Let's just try harder. You basically implied that parents weren't trying hard enough right now. What if they are? What if they are going to the school districts and those school boards are cutting off their mic and telling them that they're evil people? Well, if they had to treat them as customers, as partners in the relationship, the school board would have an incentive to listen to you.
I also just want to point out for everyone, I think that there's a lot of nuance to this conversation. So I think that there can be multiple problems and perhaps multiple solutions, but certainly these are our opinions, right? So when we're talking about it, I don't think that it's just one distinct problem that there's a solution for and that solves everything. Because, Meg, you're talking about the Common Core alternative that you're talking about here in the state of Texas, but we also see all of these woke, people choosing this as a profession. Corey's talking about some of the other problems within education. So I don't want to talk past each other by assuming that there's only one problem or one solution as we have this conversation.
So
we're gonna give time at the end for questions.
$17,000, asking to prove up $17,000. We're all thinking it's $10,000 to $11,000 per student. Can we please get that at least factually correct?
Yes, from the Texas Education Agency, the latest numbers say like $16,800 per student. It's not exactly $17,000. They quote the basic allotment on the other side, which is far less than total, which is $6,100 per student. So when we're talking about the school choice proposal, that's about $10,000 per student. I know you wanted to wait for audience questions.
Yes,
but
yeah.
I can send it to the audience members later. I have the specific data point. I think we can all,
And
on the panel at least, agree that it's about $17,000 total.
And
And
we will open it up to some audience questions at the end if time permitting. But what I noticed here was a bit of a common thread, or at least a point of contention that I think is important. Is the people that are concerned about school choice seem to be concerned that if the money is coming from the government, will that will that imply government regulations of school choice? So if I may, I'd like to redirect us a little bit back to Texas, where we have a couple of bills on in front of the legislature right now. There's the Senate Bill 2, SB 2, and the House Bill 3. Corey, I'm going to go back to you really quick, and then I'm going to ask Meg a similar question. Do you see these bills as successfully advancing your vision for education in Texas?
It's a huge step in the right direction. It would be the biggest day one school choice initiative in the country in the history of the school choice movement. So it's big, but I would like it to be even bigger. So it's universal school choice in the sense that everybody's eligible to apply, but it's limited based on how much money is budgeted for it. So the numbers floating around right now is about 100,000 students in the first year. We've seen this happen basically every other state, so this isn't unique to Texas, that they'll pass the universal program, you show demand, use that to pressure the legislature to expand the cap on the number of scholarships. This is nothing new. It's happened in other places. Arizona has no such cap, but they've been doing this for over a decade with their school choice initiative. So I like it. I think it's a huge win, and people can choose whether to take the funding or not. It's an individual decision for your own family. If you don't want to take it, that's fine. I respect that choice that you would make for your family, but you shouldn't tell a low-income family that's stuck in a school where they feel like they're being brainwashed that they can't go anywhere else, and good luck. You should just show up at the school board meeting where those people hate you anyway, and they're not going to listen to you. Or show up to the Capitol where maybe they don't listen to you either. But look, the main opponent of school choice nationally and in Texas are the Democrats. Gene Wu's the chair of the House Democrats. He's loud and proud against school choice. He sends his kids to private school. He admitted it. He's said it before. School choice for me, but not for the hypocrisy on their side. Nonstop. Beto O'Rourke, Robert Francis is his real name. He went to private school, but then he fights against school choice for others. You think about Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, they're against school choice. Randy Weingarten, the lady who lobbied the CDC to make it more difficult to reopen schools during the COVID era, they held children's education hostage for billions of dollars in ransom payments. She's against school choice. Donald Trump supports school choice. J.D. Vance supports school choice. Greg Abbott supports school choice. If you're not on the side of Greg Abbott and Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, and you're on the side of Randy Weingarten, Beto O'Rourke, and Gene Wu, and James Tallarico, you're probably not the conservative freedom fighter that you claim to be.
Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna give Meg a chance here. Meg, do you believe that the specific language in SB 2 and SB 3, HB 3, validate your opposition to school choice?
Well, first I'd like to ask Corey if you read Senator Bob Hall's statement on Senate Bill 2.
Is this the one about government can already regulate private education, or is there another one?
No. It was his, anyway, in it, one of the sentences that really stood out to me was he said he thought it was unfair that some parents could put their children in private schools and some couldn't. Do you agree with that sentiment?
If we're going to have the funding allocated on a per student basis, because we have to talk about
It's a
reality
yes or no.
and not utopia. We live in a system where families are forced, millions of families, into a one-size-fits-all government-run monopoly, and they're forced to fund it.
Okay, I'm going to ask it
We
differently.
don't have anything else like that in this country.
I'm
It's ridiculous how we're assigned to
trying
schools based on where you
I'm going to try to get a word in
live.
edgewise.
I mean,
Do you believe in universal basic income?
no.
Okay. Do you believe in universal health care?
And you're talking about things relative to the status quo where government isn't involved. In
I'm asking you a
education,
question.
no, I know exactly where you're going with the question, so I'm not just going to follow your line of questioning.
My next question is, have you read Senate Bill 2 and HB 3?
Yes, they're good bills. They're steps in the
They're-
right direction.
Okay, I have not met.
Even if they're not perfect, you may have
Corey,
things that you were
Corey,
not happy
I'm
about.
going to finish my sentence, please. I have not met anyone who has read that bill who thought it was a good bill.
Well, you live in an echo chamber, I
reads-
guess. You're not talking to
No.
people who disagree with you. I mean, you're talking to me now, and
So Meg, what do you see in the
Let's talk
bills?
about the substance.
Yeah,
As a
yeah,
good
what do you
friend
see in the
said
bills?
to me, it read like an Obama staffer wrote it. It's like, it's funny.
why are all the
because-
Obama staffers against the bill then? If they wrote the bill and they
okay, so government, again, we have to define government regulated school choice. It reeks of socialism. It removes all power, voices from the people, and it gives the government the power to choose the winners and the losers. And
they do that in the current system.
Can you give some examples specifically in the text of what you mean?
Yeah.
Well, it is socialism, right? Because
why are all the socialists against the bill then?
That's a false dilemma fallacy.
No.
yeah. Okay, so
We'll do Q&A at the end.
okay. So anyway, so it's interesting because you mentioned locking arms to fix the problem, and it would be great to see you in Austin instead of lobbying for government regulated school choice, to stand with the parents, the conservative parents, because I am conservative and I'm a mom and I've had 5 children go through the school system. I had a front row seat. I know exactly what's going on.
Did they all go through public schools the whole time? Or?
In and out. And interestingly, I ended up moving to a Christian school that used no technology. It was a classical school, books, paper, pencil, teacher. She received an incredible education and it didn't cost very much. But I want to say that there are solutions, and
So shouldn't other families have that kind of opportunity too? I mean,
actually,
you thought that was a good option.
You know what's interesting?
For one of your kids,
the first time I
least.
testified actually at the State Board of Education, what I said was it's entirely wrong and it's criminal to shackle our children most in need when it's not rocket science to educate children. This is a purposeful dumbing down of the next generation of Americans, and it's being done by the right and the left together in unison at the state and in DC. So how do you fix? I'm going to finish my sentence. I am. So there is a solution. There is a solution to the problem of our traditional public schools, because they're not going to go away. They're in the Constitution. If you want them to go away, then you need to start lobbying for a constitutional amendment. But
you're going to get enough Democrats to vote for that?
But government school...
You need Democrats to do a constitutional amendment.
But government-regulated school choice is not the solution.
But you found a solution for your family, and you pulled them out of the public school at one point, which is great.
Just let me know when I have the opportunity to state what I think
Okay,
the solution
hold on
is,
one
'cause
second.
I've been trying to for a bit.
Okay, hold on, both of you, time out. The question was about SB2 specifically, and we're looking for what specifically in this bill and in the House bill is wrong with it. What would you change about it in the actual text, rather than getting lost in the nuance of the school choice argument?
We have to talk about the school choice, because government regulated school choice is a bad idea, and a bad idea generates a bad bill. So there is nothing good in this bill. This bill needs to be killed, and the idea
What would you take out of the bill?
And
what would you amend?
And the idea of government regulated school choice needs to be stopped in its track. And
so whatever's in the bill, you're going to be against it.
Corey,
but she's not responding to the question.
So,
and what we need to be talking about when we go to Austin and when we meet our legislators, and I would encourage every person here to do this, is it's a 3-pillar solution. The first is we have to fix the basics. That means that we return to what's been tried and proven successful. Again, my husband graduated in 1991 from DISD, and he loves America, and he learned to read and write. So it can be done. And so we have to go back to what's been tried and proven successful. That's great teachers, a strong academic curriculum, books, paper, and pencil. The second pillar is we have to raise the bar. We have to begin to pay our teachers what they should be paid, and elevate the profession so that we attract the best and brightest. My grandparents, my parents, my grandmother was a teacher. That was a very wonderful profession, and it was well regarded. It isn't anymore. We need to begin to pay them so that we can attract the best and the brightest. And lastly, we've got to change the game. And how do we do that? Well, we've got to start with a zero-based budget with teachers at the front of the line. We've got to repeal all the bad laws. I'm happy to give you a list of them. I have them, but they have to be repealed. No new laws. Laws are shackling. They don't give us freedom. We have to remove all education technology, K through 8th grade. It's got to go. It is a failed experiment. It's harming our children, and that is how they're being indoctrinated. And lastly, we must audit the TEA. Texas needs a Doge, and it needs it bad, because where is all the money going? The Texas TEA needs to be audited. And before we talk about it passing any more laws, that has to be done. So my answer to you is I've read SB2 and HB3, and it's not worth going through how terrible it is, because the idea of government regulated school choice is anti-American.
Well, but government regulates.
So any bill that was in front of you, you'd be against it if it was a school choice bill, is what I'm hearing, because you're not saying like anything you would take out of the bill or amend or change. It's just the whole idea itself is something that
government regulated school choice. It's counterintuitive to think that I'm going to flee the government school and then look to the government to solve my problem.
But that's what you're doing. You're saying to go to the government to solve your problems in the government-run school system.
The fact
that's exactly what you're doing.
That you and I are even talking about this shows how far we Americans have strayed from the understanding of constitutional government and our historical commitment to individual liberty. And what you are doing is selling a bill of goods wrapped up in deceptive tissue. And parents need to understand that where the government money goes, so do all of the mandates and the control. And if nothing else, just look at Maine.
So
it's
Meg,
my favorite.
How long have you been, I applaud your efforts at fighting back against the system. How long have you been doing it? Just like over a decade or so?
Well, Corey, honestly, I'm fighting against you. I'm fighting against lobbyists like yourself who go and try to sell a new lane of education.
Let's keep it civil.
So it's the truth.
I just really quickly, Spencer, I just want to point out, I am also conservative. I fight very hard. I know many conservatives who really want school choice. So we're here to have this conversation.
80% of people on the primary ballot and conservatives.
Because it's very nuanced, and I think we're all after the same thing, which is a better future for the next generation. So let's just keep that in mind. We're going
to get to audience questions next, but just before we do, I do want to ask both of you a specific question that's been on my mind after reading the bills. Corey, I'll start with you since Meg just went. Under these bills, and this is a genuine question, I don't know the answer to it, would public schools receive less funding in aggregate to the extent that children leave public schools and utilize vouchers to attend private schools? So, because I'm trying to understand this aspect of the bill. So, like, if the state spends $1 billion on vouchers, which is roughly the bill, is that an increase to the total amount the state of Texas spends on education?
Well, you'd have a savings on the side where people are leaving the public schools because they're funded partially based on enrollment. So they would lose some funding in that sense. And look, they're spending $17,000 a kid. The proposal's about $10,000 a kid. Should save taxpayer money. And it should improve the public schools at the same time. Competition's a rising tide that lifts all boats. We saw this in Florida. A couple decades ago, they were at the bottom of the pack on the nation's report card on math and reading. You fast forward, as they've expanded school choice, they now have it available to all families. They have over 500,000 kids in Florida using scholarships for homeschooling and private education through their scholarship program. It's wildly successful. Their public schools have gotten better. So this is one way to reform the system.
Corey, have you ever heard of Hillsdale College?
Let's let him finish.
One second, because I want to get to the bottom of this.
I wanted to get to the punchline real quick, which is they're now number one in education based on U.S. News and World Report. And it's not because they threw more money at the problem. They spend about 27% less than the national average in Florida. 10 out of 11 academic studies on the subject, trying to compare apples to apples, found that school choice competition in Florida improved their public
NAEP
schools.
scores are down.
They're down everywhere. So this is not a school choice issue. It's
you're talking
closures during the COVID era. And this has happened in blue states, non-school choice states. So you can't just say Florida lost some ground. You got to look at
this year
overall.
Everyone else.
Everyone else.
So just so I understand, because I honestly didn't understand it in the bill when I read it, is whether or not the $1 billion actually does come out of the public schools. And I'm not making an opinion on that one way or the other. Just whether or not it does.
It's a separate bucket. I don't see why it needs to be a separate bucket. But the public schools are funded partially based on enrollment. So mathematically, that's why they're rallying at the Capitol against the bill. Because if they didn't lose any money at all, they wouldn't really care. They'd have fewer kids, and then they'd have more money. They'd probably say, yeah, go pass that bill. But they all lobby against it because they want to keep 100% of the funding. They also want to keep control of the minds of other people's kids so that they can churn out more Democrat voters.
So I want to ask Meg the same question. When you read the bill and your understanding of the intent of the legislative intent of the bill, do you see it as one in which it's an incremental government spending, or what Corey's describing, where there's one current pool of state dollars that go toward education, and is this just moving the money around, or is it incremental?
It's actually creating a whole new government system, so another lane. So in Texas, we have Robinhood, which is, right, everyone knows what Robinhood is. It's our legal form of socialism. Then in order to fix our public schools, we created another system, which was charter schools, which is taxation without representation. That too is legal in the state of Texas. And now they want to create a third lane, that's SB2 and HB3, where it's a full new government system. It's a banking system. And essentially, it's going to cost $1 billion. It's going to have certified educational assistance organizations within it, and you will have to apply. And when you apply, you have to give them, your gender, your race, your socioeconomic background, whether you're special needs, and that's why. And it's terrible any way you look at it, because a bad idea generates a bad bill. But I want to say, I think about this. It used to be that Lady Justice was blindfolded and we were all treated with impartiality, but this bill allows Lady Justice to peek and then pick and choose the winners and losers. That's wrong and it's bad. And interestingly, I'm going to finish and then I'll let you talk. I don't know, I do want to know, have you ever heard of Hillsdale College? Yeah. Okay, so Hillsdale College, do you know what makes it so unique and great?
I wanted to ask you a question really quickly.
Wait, it's my turn.
Well, you're asking me questions, so it's kind of fair, and you're kind of filibustering a little bit. But because you had mentioned that the charter schools are taxation without representation. If school choice and charter schools are so bad, why are tens of thousands of families on wait lists trying to get into them? Why do people apply to escape the failing government school system if it's so much better?
Do you want me to answer, or are you just going to keep asking?
Well, no, I'm framing the question for you, mm-hmm. And. If this is such a bad idea, why are more than 500,000 families doing this in Florida? Why, when Arizona opened up the application, the government website broke down because so many people applied? They now have about 100,000 families in Arizona using their school choice initiative. If it's such a bad idea,
I don't know what the question is. I'm so lost, but I'm focused on the charter school part.
But why are these families flocking to these opportunities as opposed to their assigned school if it's a bad idea?
Okay, so charter schools are taxation without representation. There's no locally elected school board. So that's
the school board is your form of accountability, not accountability to the parents. Because you admitted earlier that the school boards don't listen to you. And they cut off mics. And
well, neither does Congress listen to me. I don't go and remove them all and appoint a new Congress.
The school board representation
we live in a
isn't
constitutional republic, so we're not a democracy. We're actually a constitutional republic. In spite of
but we don't have grocery store boards, do we?
Okay.
No, we can vote with our feet and go somewhere else.
Anyway, what I was trying to say is.
Can you tell me about Hillsdale so you can finish that? I want to know.
Yeah. So anyway, what does make Hillsdale so great is Hillsdale is wise, and they chose to not accept a single dollar from the federal government. And what they said, and it's really interesting, they said most people, I don't know if anyone has heard of the Civil Rights Restoration Act. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but it passed in 1984. And most people haven't heard of it, but it's the Civil Rights Restoration Act. Again, it's usually the opposite of what it does. But it is what guaranteed that when federal money, wherever federal money went, church, hospital, school, family business, federal mandates followed. We really saw that during COVID because every hospital by law mandated that every person had to get the COVID shot because they received federal money. Didn't matter if you were in a Catholic hospital, Methodist, Baptist, didn't matter. When you receive the federal money because of the Civil Rights Restoration Act, so do all of the rules. And what happens is that as that goes into every school choice, there is no choice. So the only real choice is mine, that I have by God to move my children wherever I choose to.
And I
move
think
them.
other families should have that same opportunity too. And look, you're not on the panel. Most states do have a cap on the number of scholarships that get expanded over time. So look, I'd rather some families get an opportunity than no families at all. And if you want to call it something else, if you want to call it funding students, not systems, that's been my catchphrase for a while. But the bill's pretty clear about what it does. And how much funding is available and how many scholarships are available. And I agree with you, it should be all 5.5 million or so kids, and that it doesn't discriminate against low-income kids. If anything, the government-run school system has inequality baked into it based on zip code. You have some school districts that are doing a fine job, some public schools are great, and then you have others that are doing a horrendous job. And a lot of the times, it's based on the family's income or background characteristics determining their future, and they should have an opportunity to choose too. And so with the current bill, it's regardless of income, background, or zip code, you can apply for the funding, and then you can take that to a school that works best for you. And so as far as lawsuits, I just haven't seen evidence of that. If you have evidence of that, I'm happy to look at it.
Well,
But
of course, I don't have evidence because it hasn't happened.
it's happened in so many other states, though. And if that were going to happen in Texas, it probably would have happened in Florida and Oklahoma and the 30 or so states that have school
shorts.
shorts.
What are you going to say to that child or that family that doesn't get that?
The question was, what are you going to say to that child? I'm not going to say we're not going to fight for you, and we're just going to say go back to your school board and yell, and then have them tell you that they're not going to listen to you and cut off your mic. I'm not going to tell them that. I'm not going to tell them you just need to try harder at fixing your public school district, because they've done that already. It's been decades, and the public schools haven't gotten better. We're in Dallas right now where 18% of kids are proficient in reading. I'm going to tell them I'm going to join forces with you, and we're going to fight to get rid of any caps on scholarships. We should expand it, and it should be for everybody. And so I think that's the better way forward. There's no perfect solution anywhere, right? With the status quo or even with any bills that'll be before us. This is not the only solution. It's not a perfect solution, but it is a step in the right direction. And I'm happy to help to work with you to reform the public schools too. I think we shouldn't set up a false dilemma. We can do both of these things, and we should.
That actually segued pretty nicely into sort of a bit of a closing remark for Corey. So Meg, I'm going to give you a really brief closing remark on
I'll
it.
go super fast. I would say that we need to start thinking of alternative solutions, because the government regulated school choice is not it. It is the camel's nose under the tent, and we know where that will lead. And one of the alternative solutions is, and I would like to see you start to lobby for this, which would be tax exemptions. Tax exemptions where the money never leaves my wallet, therefore the government's not involved, and I can go spend that money wherever I want, and we're not mixing private and public money. And that will maintain true educational freedom. And then we should all be encouraging charitable donations, private scholarships, and charitable donations. We are a giving people. We do not need the government. We don't need the government to come and help us. We're not looking to the government to help us. We want what we have now fixed, and then alternative solutions.
Well, I just want to say that was incredible, because, and it really was incredible, because we just had a very diverse group of Texans listen for over an hour. We went over time, and I'm sure Corey and Meg could go for about 12 hours and keep going. But what we saw here tonight was two Republicans going toe-to-toe and in a very spirited way. And I don't think you always see this. I really am against the idea that as citizens we should, like I said earlier, fall in line with what the party wants to do. And so we were able to have a nice spirited discussion here. And I really appreciate Corey and Meg for coming out. Very much appreciate Sarah and all of you for coming into our home and having this discussion. Thank you.